Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. For those of you who missed the introductory lecture last week, I typically spend the first few minutes just exchanging general information about the course before we get on to the lecture that you really came here for. One thing I do want to pass on to you, on November the 5th, from 4:30 to 7:30, Mars is going to be hosting a best practices seminar on how to draft a patent. This is sponsored and produced and delivered by Ogilvy Renault. I can tell you, I've sat in it myself. This is the 6th time. It's a phenomenal workshop. It's very well delivered, and it's very worthwhile attending. That's the good news. The bad news is there are 48 slots, and that is it. It's a hands-on workshop with coaches at each table, so it is limited. It's free, but you have to register, and that is done online at the Mars website. Go to the events button and register there. It's first come, first served. So, I do want to nag a little bit. Last time we did this, we had about 10 no-shows. This to me is the height of discourtesy, and if you want to take a lesson away in business from E101, you don't do things like that. If you're taking up a valuable position that we've turned somebody away from. We actually now have a standby list. And they sit waiting to see if they can get in. So if you can't come, just let us know. You know, if you're sick, if you've got a sick child, if you've got a sick experiment that's gone sour on you, those are all perfectly legitimate excuses. Just tell us. It's common courtesy. And if you register, I will have your email, and I will be very cross with you, okay? I will leave it there. Tonight, as always, we want to thank CIBC for their support, but we also have a special thanks to Deloitte, who are sponsors for this evening's lecture. And we do have some members of the Deloitte team, Scott Foster and Rick Logan, who are up front here. And again, thank you for your support for this program. Now, tonight's speaker, as you know, is participating in our Lived It lecture series, and he is here through the intervention of one of our Mars volunteer advisors, and that's Albert Plant. Albert spent 15 years in pulp and paper and in BC and Quebec, and then moved into executive positions in retail. Albert, I think you and I display our age if I say that you were involved with Eaton's, Beaver Lumber, and RBC Royal Bank. I actually remember Eaton's and Beaver Lumber because I used to shop at Beaver Lumber, but some of the younger folks here may not. But trust me, they are household names and icons in the Canadian retail industry. And so Albert is a certified management consultant and has established his own management consulting business back in '85. He has been a specialist in the nonprofit sector, which is a nice tie-in with our social innovation addition this year to the course. But what's particularly relevant for this evening's speaker is that Albert is the author of The Retail Game, Playing to Win. And Albert has extended an invitation to tonight's speaker, Mr. Harry Rosen. And Albert, I'd like to invite you to do the introduction.
Good evening. Isn't this ironic? Back in the 70s, I ran T. Eaton Company's downtown stores and Ontario merchandising, and our menswear department had to compete with Harry. The rest is history. Allow me to introduce Harry Rosen. Harry founded his retail business in 1954, along with his brother Lou. Today, the retail chain that stands as Canada's #1 menswear high-quality store operation is in 7 major markets with 16 stores. Harry and Lou continue to work together. Lou can be found on the sales floor of their store in First Canadian Place to this very day. In 2001, Harry appointed his son Larry as chairman and CEO while he became executive chairman. An innovative approach to menswear, exciting progressive stores, and unique advertising, along with quality service, play an important part in the success of Harry Rosen. A commitment to service through a superior staff training program, which Harry will talk about. The use of current technology, selection, and presentation affords Harry Rosen of a huge competitive advantage. And let me add, too, and I was talking to Harry about this just before our session. If you note what I said before, that he has 16 stores in 7 locations, time and time again, he's chosen to rebuild, refurbish, and regenerate the existing stores instead of building a wider chain. There's a remarkable story of success in that strategy. Harry considers community service an integral part of a business career. He currently serves on the Mount Sinai Board of Governors, Ryerson University's Board of Governors, Canadian Association of Mental Health Cabinet for campaigning, and the McEwen Centre for Regenerative Medicine. Harry was honored with an honorary doctorate in commerce from Ryerson University in October 2003, and in January 2004, he was appointed a member of the Order of Canada. Harry is married with 4 children, 6 grandsons, and a granddaughter. Harry shares a common concern with me. A couple of days ago, my wife opened the newspaper and she says, "Albert, the life expectancy of a male in Canada is 78. Shouldn't you be looking for another country?" Allow me to introduce Harry Rosen.
Thank you and good evening. Let me begin by explaining that I am well, I guess several generations preceded me and my family who had retail genes. It's innate. I was born this way, you see. And I could give you numerous examples, but I'll give you one in particular. My uncle, he operated a little shop in Kensington. Some of you know where Kensington is. It was a little 2x4 stand, and he carried one product only, herring, and he kept it in a barrel. And in this barrel where, you couldn't see what was in it because of so much guck and grime and everything else, was his inventory of herring. And every day for 24 years, my uncle estimated exactly how many herring he needed. By 5 o'clock closing, he never had any inventory left. Total turnover of inventory. Now, in the neighborhood, he was the envy, of course, because all the other merchants had things to give away, throw out, take home. But my uncle, he was incredible and admired for this ability to estimate just how many customers and how many herring he'd need each day. Well, it was in the 25th year, near closing, when my uncle, standing there with about 2 minutes to 5, had one single herring left. And he wasn't ruffled by this. He just coolly walked his very small bit of space, and a murmur sort of started in the neighborhood because his people in retailing were, with various types of retailing, were seeing what was happening. He was going to finally be left with a piece of inventory, and this would prove that he was only human. But my uncle, he was cool, and about 30 seconds before 5, in walked a woman, and my uncle had one last herring left, you see. And she said, "I'll have a herring." And my uncle, he understands the psychology of a woman buying his last herring. He says, "Certainly." And he confidently stuck his hand into the barrel and swished around. And he brought one out and he said, "Take a look at this one. It's beautiful." And throws it on the scale. He says, 12 ounces, $1.10. She thinks for a moment, says, "I think I'd like something a little bigger." Doesn't throw my uncle. He just picks the herring up, throws it back in the barrel, swishes around, brings up the same herring. "Look at this one, fantastic." Throws it on the scale, puts his pinky on the scale. He says, 14 ounces, $1.35. She thinks for a moment. She says, "I'll have them both." But my uncle, I told you, this innate ability of his, do you know what he said? "Only one to a customer." Well, I began to work in the menswear field for a merchant on Bloor and Bay who carried fine menswear, a well-known name in this city, on a part-time basis while I was going to school. And that meant Thursday night, Friday night, and all day Saturday. And I was hired to vacuum the floors, wash the windows, dust the stock, and keep the stock looking reasonably nice. There was a small portion of the store on the main level which faced a car stop, a streetcar stop. And, it might have been under 1,000 feet. But downstairs, he had a circular stairwell that led to where his major inventory of clothing was. He had about 3,000 square feet of clothing inventory. And that's where the volume business generated from. On the main level, there were a few of our salespeople, about 2 or 3, 4, and they were looking after the furnishing sales, which was represented on the main floor. And there was very little sportswear in the store. He was mainly a clothing store. But before Christmas, he saw opportunity and would bring in something or other because of the kind of passing traffic he had and the people that would stand in front of the store waiting for streetcars. He bought a sweater that was made in Austria. It was a 4-ply cashmere, very bulky and rich. It had wonderful quality features about it, a hand-loop neck and a full-fashion sleeve. And there were a pair of socks. By the way, the sweater had what they called an intarsia diamond in it. These are knitted diamonds that were sewn in by hand, and the sweater had an argyle effect, actually. It draws from a tradition in Scottish knitting. And he had a pair of socks that had this intarsia diamond in it, and real fluffy and rich in a beige shade and in a gray shade. And the windows were extremely small, and the vestibule leading into the store was only a matter of perhaps 18 inches, so that someone who wanted to inquire about the sweater in the window, since it didn't have a price on it, could just stand outside, look in and ask one of the salespeople, what's the price of that sweater? You know, it was very attractive, took the eye. And they would say, as a general rule, $75, and the customer would say, "Thank you very much," or not even have to do that because they hadn't really entered the premises. But the people working on the main floor really thought they were beaten by the fact that it was $75. Back then, that was a lot of money for a cashmere sweater. So when people inquired, they responded in a way that had no enthusiasm and really, to my mind, wasn't working. Well, I sort of desired to sell. I watched selling, and I watched how they went about looking after customers. And one day, one was out for lunch, another one was downstairs, and somebody was at the till. And a customer stuck a head across the door, the vestibule, and said, "How much is that sweater in the window?" And I was there and a little shocked. I said, "Oh, you mean this one?" I turned my back, and I walked around, wasn't far behind the back of the counter, just a bit. I turned around, and there was the customer standing there. I pulled the sweater out of the plastic bag, and I'd learned all these quality features about it by listening to the salespeople. And I stuck it in front of him, and I said, "Feel this wonderful 4-ply cashmere sweater, and look how beautifully the hand loop neck." And I turned the sweater around and inside out and showed him the hand-sewn argyle effect, the diamonds, intarsia diamonds. And I said, it's $75, and if you really would like to buy one or give one some way for Christmas, if you leave me a deposit, I'll set it aside for you. And he did. He gave me $20, and I rang up my first sale. And so I looked for this opportunity, and the sales staff were noticing that I was having success, while they generally were joking about customers when they heard the price, sort of having a bowel movement right there on the floor, you know. But I set my mind to selling this thing because the power of it all was really working on me. And what was I doing? I was getting the customer involved in the product, and I was getting them to appreciate the product. You don't take for granted what people see in front of them. You've got to explain what a fully fashioned sleeve is, and a hand loop neck, and an intarsia diamond that is set in by hand. And all of that, of course, increased the value of the product, made it more desirable, but I got all the customer's senses involved in the product. A sense of touch, so there isn't a sense of smell, but a sense of the craftsmanship, and a sense of the luxury of the product, and the desire of ownership was much, much greater than it was when the rest of the staff responded to people who just stuck their head across the threshold and asked how much that sweater was. They did nothing to add value to the product. And by, maybe 6 weeks toward Christmas, I had in my two days where I worked evenings and one day I worked Saturday, I had rung up so many of these bills for people that either bought them immediately or gave me a deposit. And the rest of the staff, they didn't catch on. They didn't see what I was doing. They didn't see that I was getting the customer involved in the product, that it was more than just a visual feast in the window, and that their senses became engaged in the appreciation of the product, how I enhanced it. And so then I began to apply myself, as my employer allowed me the liberty to sell ties. There was a tie by Countess Mara, which was about $10. That's a lot of money for a tie in those days. And I set my mind on selling this product. First, I learned what made it special, that the particular construction of the tie was really very special and merited $10. And the price didn't frighten me because I could justify the price in my own mind. I was passionate about the product just as I was passionate about the cashmere sweater, because I saw the comparison of that product to other grades of product in our store. And the result was I was selling these ties left, right, and center. About 2 weeks before Christmas, a manufacturer came in and said, "Sam, I think we make suede jackets, and I think you might be able to sell these before Christmas." And that was opportune. Sam called me and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "You buy it, Sam, I'll sell it." So now we had to put it downstairs. And there I was, it was in the window, and a person would stick their head in the door and say, "How much is that sweater, or that suede jacket?" in the window. I'd say, "Oh, you mean this one?" Now I had to walk down the stairs, and I turned around, and sure enough, the customer was there, put the jacket on, turned up the collar, modeled it for them, et cetera, explained again that they could own one of these if they like by buying it immediately or giving me a deposit. They wanted to give a gift to someone. And I began to sell the suede jackets. I was the only one there selling the jackets. So I was having a great time learning how to sell. But what I was doing different than the other salespeople was I realized that you have to explain the features of the product, and you've got to make it desirable to the customer, and you've got to get them involved in the features of the product in order to be successful. And those were my immediate lessons in retailing. Now, it was a little later on in the fall in the spring of the year that I think it was exam time, and I got what's called infectious mononucleosis, kissing disease. I don't remember kissing anybody either. And I was in bed for 2 solid weeks, running a very high temperature. I remember the doctor coming to see me, and a blood test was done, and it was decided that I just had to stay in bed and see this thing through. And so I had the time to really think a lot about this experience I was getting in retailing that was so gratifying, and the prospects of continuing on with my education, which I wasn't doing a great job of anyway. And I decided that I was going to become a retailer. And so I remember getting out of bed and being very weak-legged. And my father, who was a former veteran and had a truck and bought junk, and that's an assortment of things, from dealers around this province, was going out on his daily route. And he didn't have any money. He just lived from day to day, but he made enough money to keep our family and food and so on. And I said, I want to join you on your drive. He was going to Gananoque, I remember. And I went with him, and I sat there very weakly, and then I said to my father afterwards, Dad, I think I want to go and open my own shop. And he didn't say anything. He didn't listen. Really didn't say anything at all. And we drove back, I remember, and I came back to Strength, and I decided I wasn't going to go back to school. I was going to go find a store. And so I went looking for a location. And I found on Parliament Street, which was Cabbagetown, a store that a merchant was vacating who wanted to sell the lease and whatever fixtures he had in there, which were very crude wood shelves, for $1,500. And I thought, I'll make this location work. I'll bring customers to the store, even though this isn't a likely place to sell higher-priced menswear. And I went to my father and I said, I want $500. And my father didn't have the $500, but we had a relative who had come over after the war and had started an enterprise in washing machines, which were in apartments, and you used coinage to go and have your laundry done. And he was very smart. He learned how to repair the machines himself, and had expanded his business to where he was doing very nicely. And this cousin or distant cousin of mine gave my father $500 in quarters. And I took the money to the merchant and I said, now I'll give you $1,000 and I'll give you $500 down and $500 in 60 days. And I negotiated successfully, and so we made a deal. And then I got a friend of mine who was a bit artistic, and he came in and we painted the shelves together. And then I'd gone to a number of our vendors to see if they would, that is vendors of Sam Lebo's, that was the name of the store, would sell me merchandise. And they wouldn't give me credit. There was only one manufacturer that gave me credit. He gave me $200 worth of neckwear, which sold at $5 a tie, so that wasn't a heck of a lot of inventory. But I was able to get cloth on consignment from a manufacturer of clothing who made a pretty good garment, and I had that to fill in some space so that we looked a bit like a tailor shop. This was a very small store. It had a stove in the middle of it, and there were 2 apartments overhead. And these apartments were rented to 2 families who, the rent on the building was $150 a month. It was held by a trust company. And the two apartments brought in $185 a month in rent. So I didn't have much of a business education, but I calculated that looks like a low overhead, doesn't it? Yeah. So I better make a deal here, and I did. And as I say, went to open our shop. And then Sam, my former employer, drove down in his big car with some surplus boxes and plastic fixtures. And I used those to fill out the store a little bit. And so we were ready to open our store. Now, I can only remember the sense of just wanting to tell the world about how special we were and how we'd make clothing for a man that was so excellent. And I went up the street and talked to every merchant on the right up to Carlton Street, I remember. In each store, I introduced myself, told them that we were the new kids on the block, and that we made excellent clothes. And I know in each and every case that I impressed those people, and I impressed them sufficiently. I felt that, they would tell others, and that ultimately somebody who was a prospect would come in our door. And next door to us, I remember there was a Chinese laundry and a Chinese restaurant, and it stunk. It was terrible. Not all restaurants stink, but that one did. And the reason I knew was because I had to use his washroom. We didn't have one, you see. So I began to, as I say, proselytize what our business was about. Now, one day, a young man stood outside the door and looked in, and he was wearing a straw hat, a white shirt, a tie, and a suit. And I worked the windows. I walked out and talked to everybody that looked in our windows and started a conversation. And his name was Ron O'Doherty, and he was a son of immigrants, Irish immigrants who lived in the neighborhood, and had made it out of that milieu and managed to work his way up within the McLean Hunter organization and became a space rep for the McLean magazine. And so I found all this out about him and talking to him, and I invited him in. We had a cup of coffee, got to know each other. And a couple of weeks later, he came in and bought a suit. Now, I measured him, and I took a sample of his cloth, and I put it on a card. And everything else that I knew about Ron O'Doherty, I found out who he worked for, who he responded to. I found out as much as I could about him and noted all that as information that would be useful for me in helping him to make further selections at a later date. And all his measurements were noted on the card. And so now I had my first customer. And from him, I asked him, could I ask you to give me the names of your colleagues, people that within the McLean Hunter organization that I could write. If I can use your name and tell them about what we do down here, I'd be delighted. If not, I'll be very glad to just keep it anonymous. And so he gave me a few names, allowed me to use his name, and I sent out letters. And I wrote the corniest letters you could ever imagine to these people, telling them how Parliament Street was likely a place they wouldn't come to under normal conditions, but it was worth their while, and here's the reasons why. And then I'd follow up with a phone call. And I had a 10% hit rate. I was successful in bringing people to our store. And so over a period of time, a very short period of time, I generated, living at home, sufficient capital to buy other commodities and round out the store's assortment of inventory. And now I had a real menswear shop going. And through this method I used of working through my satisfied customers and following up with phone calls. And I would go anywhere. I mean, I went, if someone called me and they wanted me to meet them at their home or their office, I offered to do so. I volunteered to do so. In fact, I had two occasions I remember very carefully. One was that someone's father had passed away, and he asked me to come up to the funeral parlor and measure him, and I sold him a suit with 2 pair of pants. On another occasion, I went to the the tuberculosis hospital out in the West End, I remember, and measured a fellow there. And that was quite an experience because he was all skin and bone, but he needed clothes. It didn't bother me. So I was working my way, as I say, to being a more complete store and keeping records on file of every customer so that if he came back a year or two later, I brought out his card, I showed him what was in his wardrobe, I showed him all the things that I thought were right for the kind of business that he was in. I considered all the demographics that were correct. I knew what the parameters were when it comes to dressing for the IBM or McLean Hunter, that you're going to wear a summer hat in the summertime was mandatory, a white shirt, and a suit. And with that information, I knew pretty well, the parameters within which I should work and prescribe clothing to his colleagues, etc. And in time, I worked my way to the senior levels of McLean Hunter, and they introduced me to the senior levels of people at Southam McLean, which was, I believe, a family split, but they had a variety of trade magazines. The other was consumer magazines. These were mostly trade magazines. And by 1961, I had developed a staff of several people, all of whom practiced very much what I did, and that is building relationships. They were building relationships. Those cards that I kept were really a membership, in a manner of speaking, in an elite club. And men like changing their barbers. If they trust you, great things happen, and they're one-stop shoppers. And that's really what men are like today. They don't like shopping, but once they find someone they trust, they begin to become loyal to one store. And that's how we built our clientele. And by 61, well, actually it was about 57 or 58, 1958, that I learned from our vendors who the outstanding merchants were in North America through their sources. Perhaps they were a branch of an American business or a European business, but I knew of the best store in Los Angeles and in Chicago and New York and other locales. And I wrote these merchants and told them I was a young merchant struggling to build a business, and might I come and see their operation and exchange ideas and learn what I can from them. And after all, that's what else can you do as a merchant? You're not going to discuss your business with a competitor, so you've got to find people that are trying to solve the same issues you are, but hear it from people who are successful. And so Paul Stewart in New York became a regular stop for me, and I learned so much about merchandising from him. And Dick Carroll in San Francisco, and rather Los Angeles, in Santa Monica and Rodeo, was a fixture there. He had a wonderful Hollywood type of clientele. Another guy up the street, same sort of thing. I befriended merchants and went to school on what I could learn from these people. In Washington, I had another merchant that taught me a great deal. And so by 61, I had now a vision in my mind's eye of a kind of store I wanted to build that was a true reflection in its appearance of what I wanted as an ideal shop. And I went looking for a location and found one on Richmond Street. Now, what was going on Richmond Street was the new City Hall had been built, and a variety of stores facing the City Hall, the south side of Queen Street, which was a beer parlor, a casino theater, and a number of pawn shops and other assorted bric-a-brac, but generally low-end, was in place and would be excavated in a matter of a couple of years. So there really wasn't any traffic for business on my location, but I liked this location because it was near King and Yonge, and that's where, rather Bay and Yonge, I should say, and that's where the, Bay doesn't meet Yonge anywhere. Somebody better catch me on this one. How about Bay and King? Is that okay? All right, thank you. And I realized that if I could bring them to Parliament Street, I could bring them to Richmond Street. And I found this space in a building owned by Yallis and Rotenberg It had been vacated by Imperial Oil, and the space was not retail space, and I began to negotiate with them, and they really didn't want me as a tenant because they felt their architect would be offended to put a retail store into this rather institutional-looking building. But I convinced them of it being all right, and that it would work okay, that I'd do a type of facade that was unique, etc., and we finally made a deal. And then, with this picture in my mind's eye of the kind of store I wanted, and I can tell you, only describe it one way, and the women present, please don't be offended. What I wanted to do is have a store that looked like an exclusive men's club. I wanted it to look like one of those clubs on Pall Mall in London. And just at that time, they were demolishing in Rosedale a marvelous structure that was formerly, at one time, had been a lieutenant governor's residence and was used during the war, I think, for shell-shocked veterans. It was wonderful, a period type of thing. I mean, today, the travesty that they destroyed that. But I went there and I talked to the wreckers, and I was able to buy these soft stone carvings that came out of the garden, and I could envisage putting a marble tabletop on them and putting ties on them. And I bought a fireplace in the interior. I bought an 11-foot door, a brute of a door. I had to go, I don't know where I had to go to find hinges that could handle that brute, but I got a saber handle for it. And I went to some auctions and I bought some photographs, pictures rather, of people that looked like my relatives that came over on the Mayflower, and put them up on the wall with a walnut veneer and in the interior of the store. Got some wrought iron and hung some ties from them. And the place really had a great feeling, real men's club. Now, in 1957, back in my Parliament Street days, I still worked the windows, and I approached this guy who was looking at the merchandise, and he was wearing a leather jacket with a Marlborough crest on it. And I got to know him, and his name was Bob Bond, and we became very good friends. And Carl Brewer also lived in Riverdale, and he would walk by our store. He was interested in our store, but Bob took a real deep interest in the store. And so I was able to get the Toronto Maple Leaf blazer business, and when they won the Stanley Cup, I think it was 2 or 3 years later. And I got the Silver Seven, which was the management group, and they became customers. Harold Cotton and the whole group became regular customers. I had cards on them too. I could even tell you their girlfriends' phone numbers, you know. I had everything. So with all that, when I opened the store, I didn't know how to publicize it, really, and it was not a trafficked area. It was just behind this, as I say, row of stores that of no consequence. But there were nice buildings behind us with lots of financial people in there, accounting and so on. And so that was what I was going to work to bring into our store. And for my opening, Red Kelly and Bob Bond, soon after they won the Stanley Cup, were on the floor to greet customers for me, and they never charged me a nickel for it. And boy, were they an attraction, I'll tell you. The crowd just gravitated to them. But I was busy doing one thing, and that is introducing myself to the customers and letting men look through the store. And every time I could, when you see a row of suits, all you see is sleeves. That doesn't tell you a darn thing about the product. You really have to put it on to see it in 3 dimensions, to experience if there's anything special about it. What's more, you have to tell people about it, and you got to be passionate about it. And so I had a garment that was made for us, especially in Hamilton, Ontario, by a firm called Copley. And I put this garment on as many people as I could, almost forcefully, just so that they could stand in front of the mirror, look at themselves, and I could point out how beautiful they looked. And immediately I turned to volume of business. I had hired several people that I trained, and what's more, you know, the best training in the world is not do as I say, but do as I do. And so they did, and we collectively made enough money in the first month to offset any pre-opening expenses, and we were off and running. We were doing very well. And I formalized our training to the extent that I had a fair amount of written material, et cetera, because I felt that sometime in the future, if we expanded beyond where we were, that would be useful for our management. And of course, they all went through that same type of training themselves. So this all happened about a year after I opened on Richmond Street. The store was very successful. And in walked a gentleman that I looked after for a suit. And I always found out things about our customers, as I say, and we all kept records as much as we could of the background of the customer, et cetera. His name was Stan Burkhoff, and I found out that he was the creative head of an advertising agency called Young and Rubicam. And he'd been sent up here from New York. The whole story is that he was a lawyer in his family's law firm in Chicago, but he loved to write. And so he left Chicago and went to New York and got a job at a firm called Doyle, Dane and Bernbeck. Now, in the advertising business, there are advertising agencies in New York that are always called the hot shops, or anywhere. And the hot shop was Doyle, Dane and Bernbeck. And what they had done post-war was they undertook to market the Beetle, which is the Volkswagen Beetle. Now imagine that, after the war, a German product, they put it in, got it successfully launched, and then they had another program called We're Avis, we're number 2. And so this is the kind of training he got. And he was a great writer. And then Young and Rubicam lost their creative head here in Toronto, a guy called John Strayton, the Canadian. He went to another agency, and they sent him and his family up here. Rather, they hired him and sent him up here to spend about 3 years and to break in somebody as a replacement. And he came up here, and as I say, he came in and bought a suit. He was impressed with what I did. And I found out he was a creative head of an advertising agency. Now, I didn't know a thing about advertising. And I just was very curious, and I said to him, what I don't know a thing about ads. What goes into the process, et cetera, et cetera. And I saw a glint in his eye, and it suggested to me there's something interesting going on here. So he came back a few days later, and he said to me, by the way, I suggested to him that we probably we're doing well, but we'd do even better if we knew how to advertise. And he came back and he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He says, I'll do some ads for you. There are 2 conditions, though. First is, it'll cost you 2 suits per ad. The second is that you can't change a thing. You want to change a word, the deal is off, okay? Now, what was he telling me? He was telling me something I learned later, and that was that creative people are often very frustrated in their interaction with their clients. And these are the big clients, the people that use television, media, and all kinds of other things and spend thousands, if not millions of dollars. And they always felt that their best ideas went in the garbage can, that they didn't have the courage to use them. So here I am, a small tailor shop, and I'm a prospect for giving him some gratification for the creativity that he can exhibit in doing ads for us, for 2 suits, one for him and one for the art director, a guy called Reed Bell. And with that, he said, let me know if you like the idea. And I said, yes, I do. I like the idea. And he said, okay, then we'll sit down at my house and 2 or 3 times a week for several weeks, and you tell me what goes through the mind of your consumer when he's buying a suit. And so I went through a period of several weeks where we talked about men as consumers and the fact that they hate shopping and they have no plan for their wardrobe. And when they wind up buying a suit, take it home, it looks just like one in their closet. And that they have no sense of furnishings and the importance of putting themselves together totally, et cetera, et cetera. And with all that, they produced a set of ads, which he gave me to look at and said, now remember the deal. If you want to change a thing, the deal is off. And he said, I'll tell you something else too. He says, you take these ads, show them to people, and you won't run them, okay? Because everybody will have a different idea of changes that'll work better for you. Everybody's an expert when it comes to advertising. And I said, oh, okay. Well, took the ads. He said, just go with what's in your gut. And I looked at them, and I thought for a while, and I thought, yeah, I think I like the idea. I'll go for it. And then I went down to the Globe and Mail, as he suggested, and I talked to the national sales manager, a guy called Frank Greason. And I asked him for page 3, and I told him what he told me to tell them, and that is, these ads would be as good for the Globe and Mail as they were for Harry Rosen, and I got page 3 on a temporary basis. And we had enough budget to run 6 ads, and I'm going to show you the first ad, but I want to also explain what it really meant for me to meet these people. It completely remade my whole conception of communication. I had none. My only communication was verbal. I wrote letters, and as I say to you, they were the corniest letters you ever saw. They were effective, but they were corny. But here I was going to learn from 2 people that saw the world differently, and they changed my mind. They changed my head. And I'm going to show you ad number 1, which I ran on a Tuesday. We always ran Tuesday because Tuesday was a business paper, the Globe and Mail only. First ad. This is the first ad. And that's a back shot of me, and it says, this is Harry. Harry is a store. Harry sells suits. Harry's suits are all naturally tailored. Harry calls this lean, unpadded styling the Cambridge look. Harry specializes in the Cambridge look. If you like the Cambridge look, remember his name, Harry. Ad number 2, that's 1,500 lines. This is also 1,500 lines. A week later, on Tuesday, I had enough budget for 6 ads, as I said. This is the Cambridge look, the conservative fashion, natural tailoring. The Cambridge look is styled individually. It is not a uniform, nor is it fat or fancy. It'll be as right tomorrow as it is today. Harry specializes in the Cambridge look. If you like it, remember his name, Harry. Now, I couldn't appreciate the brilliance of this advertising program until years later when we finally expanded. I mean, it certainly brought immediate results, but it really made its way across the continent. That's how amazing this was. Now, we weren't showing ads in the typical pose of fashion advertising that is so damn boring and is ephemeral, has a short life to it. We were telling people things that were going on, buzzing around in my customers' minds, but are never expressed because men are so damn intimidated, about admitting that they're ignorant when it comes to fashion. Here's an ad that talked about what does natural shoulder really mean, which is the stylish suit that we were selling exclusively. We had it made, as I said, in Hamilton. Stan was a brilliant writer, by the way. He would always finish off the ad with a punchline, and people loved it. He just had these corny jokes he would throw in at the very end of the print. And Ask Harry continues, and it catches on fast, real fast, because I remember walking down Bay Street and hearing 2 guys standing talking to one another, and he said, I don't know, ask Harry, So it had made its way into the lexicon of the culture, you see. It was amazing, really. Trousers are worn longer, as you can see, but this is another question it brought up. Now, as he said, I never changed a thing, never. I just provided, as I say, insights into what the customer was thinking. When I caught on, and I realized that I really could read what was going on in the customer's mind, whether we were dealing with the right product or what his thinking was, I was able to see there was an idea there, and I'd run to the phone and I'd call Stan at Young and Rubicam, and I'd say, Stan, here's what happened. And it would turn into an ad. And this was another ad that ran, what kind of shirt and tie should you wear with a Cambridge look suit? Ask Harry. Ask Harry, ask Harry, ask Harry. And it's amazing. This was the beginning of the branding of Harry Rosen. It really was. It became the vehicle on which we expanded our business to where we do $220 million a year today in 15 locations in the 7 major markets of this country. Now, as I said, I could not change a thing. And I didn't realize that that entailed taking certain risks. This was an ad that was telling the public that dry cleaning is a severe process, and that if you over dry clean a suit, it'll wear the suit out more rapidly than it will on your back. I didn't realize that there was a convention of dry cleaners in the city of Toronto on this occasion. Just, fluky thing that happened. Well, they were offended by this, and they got some press releases together and refuted the things I said in the ad. I got telephone calls from the media asking me how I felt about what they said. I refuted what they said. We had a public shootout for a week. At the end of the week, we kissed and became friends. I became a consultant of the Dry Cleaning Institute of America. And we got $1 million worth of wonderful advertising from this very innocuous ad. And this one really hammered home, I tell you. Now since we didn't have passing traffic and we were a destination store, Christmas didn't mean a great deal to us. We had Christmas products, but we didn't sell to passing traffic. Our customers might have bought gifts, but not the general public. So here we were saying to the wives or friends, girlfriends of some of our customers, that why take a chance and wind up being hung from this ugly tie on Christmas morning when you can come in and Harry Rosen has all the records and can tell you what the taste of your purchase should be for the particular individual, and you'll be assured of not having this happen on that morning. Well, the 11:45 newscast that day, Gordon Sinclair, the late Gordon Sinclair, pounced on this ad, and he just lambasted it all over the place, how it was the height of just bad taste and merchants taking the public, for granted, and all the terrible things that are associated with doing an ad like this. And immediately after he got off the radio, the telephone started to ring, and I started to hear radio stations calling and asking me what I thought. And I didn't know what I thought. First of all, I thought I better leave the country right away. I thought, oh, well, if anybody sees evil in this ad, they're evil themselves. Well, the thing just fumed and fumed and fumed, and for a solid week, we got $10 million worth of wonderful advertising out of this ad, I got to tell you. It was just fabulous, really. This ad campaign, we did it twice a year for 6 consecutive weeks. That's all our budget would allow. But it kicked in and started to bring people in from destinations outside of Toronto, small towns, business people who came to Toronto for business purposes. The Globe and Mail was not a national newspaper yet, so we weren't hitting that part of the country. But at a later time, not much later, our ads were being read all over the country. And when we finally opened a second store in Edmonton, we had not only a following that knew us from coming down to Toronto for business purposes and had experienced us firsthand, but were aware of Harry Rosen. And when we opened in Edmonton, I can't tell you the kind of response I got by being in the store, people coming in and telling me how grateful they were that there was a Harry Rosen store in their community. So this one was another one that got me into trouble. I approached the store that morning, I remember, and there was pickets, women, and some of them had dogs too, And what they opposed here is that they thought we were mocking, obviously, women, femininity and what have you. Well, I didn't realize it, but that somewhere in the Bible, it states that women should not wear men's clothes. And so I had offended a whole coterie of people I didn't even know existed. Well, this got a lot of repetition too, and I got some wonderful publicity out of it too. Now, 1964, with a business prospering and now we've got more sophisticated ways going with capturing information on our customer as to what's in his wardrobe and all the other important things that we needed to know. a mannequin tipped over in the window, and it fell on a lamp and started a fire. And when I got home that Sunday evening after taking my family to dinner, the fire department called and told me that they were on the premises and that we'd had a fire. I rushed down to the store and took a look, and my God, I can't tell you what it looked like to me. All the lighting had been pulled out of the ceiling. The front of the store had virtually been caved in. The floor had heaved up, and there was about 13 inches of water throughout the whole place. And the front section of the store, garments were sheared in half, etc. In the back of the store, there was only smoke damage, and there was merchandise there. But most of the damage was done at the front of the store. And I looked at this, and what do you think is the thought that possessed me? Are we going to be closed to business tomorrow morning? Our customers are not going to be coming? Now, I had business interruption insurance. I had every kind of insurance that I could require, including profit insurance. So I could have stayed closed for a year if I had a legitimate reason, and my profits were assured. But I wasn't going to close that store up, no how. So that evening, I called not only the adjusters, who were called in, of course, but I called somebody to come in and put temporary lighting on, which was all wired to the ceiling. I got somebody to pump out that 13 inches of water. I got the floor scraped up and all the damaged merchandise heaped into one big heap near the door. And then I called Reed Bell at home. Stan Burkhoff had gone to live in Detroit and was succeeded by by one of the people in his firm, Pat Harvey, who was a marvelous writer, and she carried on in that connection. And we wound up with a hoarding that was put in place in front of the store that the insurance company had put there for purposes of securing the place. And I called Reed Bell at home and I said, Reed, Tuesday's ad's got to go. We got to do something else. And over the telephone, he dictated an ad to the Globe and Mail. And the ad, and we did not own the inventory. I didn't realize it at that time. But what happens is you put an insurance claim in, and it is now the property of the insurance company. And how they dispose of it is their business. But a week later, while things were not resolved, I ran this ad. What happens to a bleeding madras jacket when a fire hose hits it? And then I succeeded in buying the merchandise under closed bid back that was only smoke damaged. And I began to redesign the store to open in the fall. This was the ad we ran when it was okay to go ahead and start to advertise. And I approached the store that morning and I took a look, and there was a lineup of men all the way around the corner. There must have been 200 people. Chief justices and lawyers and accountants and highly paid people coming in to buy a smoke-damaged suit, you know. Really, it was remarkable. It was remarkable, really. But we made our way through from May till opening in September, and when we did, we had a wonderful store and had the benefit of all the experience we had beforehand. And this was the ad that ran. And so a year later, I ran this ad just to tease, you know, the fire department. They didn't find it funny at all. This is an ad of a man who has worked with me for 50 years. I now have probably 5 people over 50 years with us, and over 40 years there are a number, and over 25 there are a great number. We don't have a large turnover of people. But Nello is ingenious. He's a great tailor, and he's a smart guy on the floor too. You're not talking to a tailor, you're talking to somebody that's got selling in the back of his mind. And this is Nello, and it's a story. There's an ad about Nello Sansoni, his clothes, and the clothes he designs. He's 5'4". We probably didn't need a full page. So that made the point, and that ad won the Norma Award in the United States. We wound up having to go down and receive an award for it. This is an ad. Jumping ahead, the series of ads in between, of course, are voluminous, but this is me, and the idea is that I'm always in touch, and even though I have a good staff that looks after customers, I'm always in touch with what's going on, And it's always Harry's ideals that are being executed. And so there I am relaxing in my bathtub with my rubber duckies, reading about tall ships. And there's a telephone close by. The customer can always reach me, you see. That ad was a great ad and also won another award as well. Now, I won't get into detail in expanding our across the country because I think that I'm probably limited in time. I'll hit you with a couple of highlights in any event. We opened our first store outside of Toronto in Edmonton, and we opened in the West Edmonton Mall. I did not want to open a store outside of Toronto. I couldn't imagine that we could run a business at a distance like that. But the people that developed this store kept giving me everything I asked for, and I was really doing this under false pretenses, you know. And at some point I had to say, you know, I'm either going to do this or not do it. And so I decided to go ahead and do it. And we sent staff out to the West Edmonton Mall to train staff and have them reside there to permanently, designed the store and opened it. And we had such success immediately, people who had been reading the ads for years and were so grateful to have our store there, that our business took off, and we were so successful that I ran to Vancouver. Within days, I had another location there, and worked our way across the country, opening up in the major centers, never requiring a nickel in additional capital, always working out of profit and cash flow, and that never caught up with me. This is an ad we ran in Winnipeg, where in the second season in retailing, you usually see maturing in your trade. Second year, I should say, and you begin to see repeat trade and a lot of new faces who are referred by customers and so on. But this wasn't happening quite that rapidly in Winnipeg, and I felt there was a problem here in awareness. And so we ran a series of ads that were designed for this purpose. This is me in a Conestoga wagon. How long do you have to be there before you're a Winnipegger? And there are 3 other ads that ran, but what you may not have noticed is that we misspelt Winnipegger. Now that is a no-no. You don't go into somebody's territory and misspell their name. You know, that is terrible. So I ran this ad, which was an apology, and that really hit a home run because the media jumped on it. They loved it. I got a lot of interviews, talked to people from the press and so on. And this is a columnist writing about it. Harry's learned his lesson. And the store vaulted ahead, and we got the 20% increase that we usually experience through maturity. We opened a second store in Calgary, and I thought that this might be funny. It too was provocative in some respects. You know, you don't go calling Calgary Cowtown unless you're from Cowtown, but this worked wonderfully well as well. And I'm a real cowboy, don't you think? And this is a series of ads that we ran when we got the flagship idea from Ralph Lauren and the Rhinelander Palace in New York on the 61st Street in Madison. The idea of a flagship store is a place where you're generous in your space and you display your merchandise beautifully, and it's in a location where sort of all roads or all paths lead to that store. I'm talking about the fact that, you know, in Toronto, probably the heaviest traffic in English-speaking Canada is right here, and this was the ideal location to do it in. I lucked into this real estate and bought it and renewed it, and then started running a series of ads. Before that, I thought to myself, well, we must advertise in television, we must advertise on radio, we must use a variety of media, we must blow our brains out, because we really got something to crow about here. It's never been done in Canada before. A 3-level store. It is now 5, by the way. And so the ads were designed. I rejected all the ideas and went back to print, the one thing I think I had a mentality for. This is ad number 1. It ran on the Monday. Labor Day was Monday. Tuesday, this was the ad that ran. Wednesday, that's our old store on Parliament Street. That's my son actually loading up the car. He simulates me, unfortunately. And finally, on Thursday, the opening day, the store opened. that's me wheeling a rack from our other store, which was 2 doors away, into the new space. And this ad now is running on Wednesday night. So it wasn't possible really for me to be wheeling this rack in there. But somehow or other this ad struck an emotional chord. It's amazing how it'll do that. And people just streamed in, really. And women hugged me and kissed me and wanted to take me home. It was remarkable, really. And on the roof you see a tent which we managed to put up there in case of inclement weather. And we had 600 people as guests for the opening. And the store took off, and it was an amazing success. Currently, it's 50,000 feet, 5 levels, all being redone, and it's an exciting store. People tell me there's no place other and like it anywhere in North America or the world, for that matter. And then I'll conclude by telling you that expanding outside of Canada seemed likely to me, and I negotiated a space in Chicago on the Miracle Mile, which I thought was the right place to have your windows on the world. You're in the central part of the continent, and you've got a lot of traffic that comes from the east and west. It's sort of that kind of point in geography. And I negotiated for a location next to Saks, moving across the street on Michigan Avenue. And after I reached a verbal agreement, the landlord sold all his property out and left the continent, and I wound up having a new landlord who looked at the numbers they'd agreed to and said to me, no, this doesn't work for us, we have to renegotiate. So I walked away, and that was the worst thing I ever did, because I wound up being convinced, because of the agreement, the free trade agreement between Canada and the United States, that Buffalo, New York would be a great place. They were building a shopping center called the, I forget what it's called for the present anyway, but it was the best in the western part of New York State. There was intention of bringing 3 American New York department stores there. One didn't open at all, B. Altman. The other one was a mere shadow of what it ought to be. And the third one was also a bust. And so there wasn't any real high-grade traffic in the city. And men are funny in that city, you know. They just, they don't know how to dress, and they buy from cheap stores. And the ones that like good clothes, they go to New York, they go to Boston, they go to Chicago. They shop outside of the city, you know, and their wives teach them how, too, I'll tell you. So I didn't want to open at the time that the center opened, because it was May, and that was halfway through the selling period. And I ran this ad instead and simulated the storefront with photography on the hoarding, and actually stood outside the store and gave out magazines, the Harry magazines, which some of you may have seen. And this was the ad I ran. And then on August, I ran this ad. That was for the opening of the store. And I remember it very, very well, because I was leaving the house at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got a phone call that my mother had passed away, so that I couldn't go to the opening of the store for a week. But we had trained the staff, and we had sent some of our people down there to, again, export the culture and deal with people this way. And our store was modestly successful. At the best of times, we got people from Syracuse, we got them from down New York State highways, we got them from almost to Cleveland, down into Erie, Pennsylvania. We got people from all over, but that market in itself was a waste of time. I should have been on the Miracle Mile, and that's where Harry Rosen would have expanded in the United States and become a factor. Bad mistake. This is an ad that also won a Norma Award. I think it's a brilliant ad. It's got me going through customs. Anything to declare, Mr. Rosen. What a beautiful entree into telling the story of who we are. And it was a real winner. And this is 50 years in business, and I sort of retire, become executive chairman. And those are comments of our various vendors about our business. And this is the 5-level store that has just been completed, I think, just over a year now. It's a marvelous interior. If you get a chance, come in and say hello. I'm there every Saturday. I'll be glad to fit you for a suit or buy you coffee, one or the other. This is the interior. Our method of presenting merchandise really is, its objective is to make multiple sales, not sell you a single item. So it's not by accident that you find that a shirt sits next to the right trousers, next to the right belt, the shirts sit right next to the right ties, et cetera, et cetera. We merchandise extremely well, and that is the finale, and you'll have to excuse me for running over in time, but you've been so attentive. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Are there any questions? Don't be bashful.
I've got a question.
Please.
It's going back to your story. You said that when you were sick and you had a vision, you said, I'm going to start my own store.
Kissing disease.
Yes. And you said you're going to start your own store. And then you said you had a vision of what you wanted your store to look like. And you decided that you wanted to have a store that was like a gentleman's club and this is what you want to do. And you went about doing that. But like today, many life coaches, they will tell people to have a vision of what you want your whole life to look like, what you want your whole business to look like. Like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I want to have a global business or whatever. Did you ever, in the beginning, think, I want to have, in 10 years, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, I'm going to have this global business or I'm going to have this and that?
I am a terrible planner. I never aspired to having more than one store. We expanded that store 3 times in that location. I finally got a location offered to me in Yorkdale. Jack Cameron wasn't making it in this wonderful shopping center. And so I got it by default, you might say. I didn't get it for cheap, but I got it. And so that happened on short notice and expanded with the other shopping centers as they expanded across Toronto, the major regionals. All again, I was never aggressive about searching out location. These people came to us, felt we were a necessary tenant. So when I went to Edmonton, I negotiated the same way. I kept asking for impossible things, hoping they'd go away. And in fact, what I did was, I fell asleep in the discussion, while I was sitting in the chair. Some years later, one of them came over to me and said, "You think I didn't know you fell asleep, eh?" So, no, I've never been a big planner, but I do have a CFO that's very good at finance. And he sets out our merchandising plan, et cetera, and we abide by it. We aren't all off our cuff type of thinkers. But truly, I think today, if you said to me, is it possible to do $1 million? I know it's not in Canada, not for upscale menswear like we sell, but you could do it if we were in the United States. And you could do it in Canada if we were in women's wear. And I'm always asked by women why we don't have women's clothes. And I got to tell you, I can't figure women out.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall we call it quits? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one quick question actually. In regards to competition, you didn't mention whether when you started earlier on there was fierce competition, and how can we apply it nowadays where you have sharks or whales in the retail environment, unlike maybe 30, 50 years ago?
So what I understand your question to mean is, how do we compete with some of the types of retailers that are around selling at presumably lower prices, et cetera? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that, and also when you began, was there competition facing you?
Yes, certainly. We, in opening on Parliament Street, we were choosing to do it the hard way. If we had a lot of capital, we might very well have gone on Bloor Street or Yonge Street, where the traffic was. But we built the traffic to come to our store, et cetera. Now, the second part of your question, which is, what was it again?
How to compete?
How do you
with them
compete with these people?
nowadays?
Simple. Have outstanding service, consistent quality, and present your merchandise in a way that men can comprehend how things work. So our displays are worked out and our presentations are worked out, and the place is like a museum. You can walk through it. But it's not a don't touch me type of place. It's the kind of thing, it's tactile, you want to hold it, pick up things, you can do that, it's informal, etc. We have, our store to some extent is a vending machine, but it'll never make it on its own. You have to have service. Men still are loyal to people who they trust. And that if they trust you, it's because you have product knowledge and you can understand how their minds work and what type of work they do and what's appropriate for them. You do those things, you're going to be successful in any market. And I've decided that's the case in Europe, but I'm not going to make it there, so it doesn't matter. Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Rosen, I know that I speak for absolutely everybody here to say that was just such a wonderful journey, and it showed not just the brilliance of your strategy, but that persistent commitment to quality. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We have a small bottle of a special blend of Ontario wine that we blended here at Mars with the winemakers from Henry from Pelham. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. It was absolutely terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.